Welcome to In Conversation, part of TELEPRESENCE, a cyber expo hosted by select rising thesis students of the MFA Design and Technology program at Parsons School of Design. It features 7 themes highlighting the artist's individual exploration and examination during the past year, all while exploring the potential of non-physical communities. The 3-day event includes a digital showcase, workshops, and artist talks. I am Bhavya, rising thesis student at MFA Design and Technology, and I will be a moderator today. 2020 is the first time that many of us feel physically distant and isolated from their local communities. Yet, for some of us, limited access is an everyday occurrence. Our conversation today is centered around neophysical connection as part of our Cyber Expo. In this online dialogue, we will discuss ableist fallacies, accessibility, and immersion beyond the physical realm with artist, activist, and educator Kevin Gotkin. Before we begin our discussion today, I have some brief housekeeping notes. Firstly, we will begin with Kevin's artist talk and presentation, followed by moderated discussion and Q&A towards the end. Kevin will also be doing an access check before the presentation begins. And this talk will be recorded and will be available after the show on our website at mfadt.space, as well as on IGTV. If you're not comfortable with being recorded, kindly turn off your camera. And we ask everyone but the artist to have their mic off during the talk. If you have any question, please either use the Zoom raise your hand function or type it in the chat. During our Q&A portion, we will call on you to unmute your mic and ask the question if you're comfortable. And most importantly, for our community guidelines, this is a safe space. We expect everyone as speakers and viewers to treat each other with respect, care, and sensitivity. So let's begin. I would like to introduce Kevin Gotkin. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today. And before I pass on to Kevin, I would like to talk a little bit about Kevin's practice. Kevin's work combines research, artistry, and activism. Kevin is the visiting assistant professor of media, culture, and communications at NYU. He received his Ph.D. from the University of Pennsylvania in 2018 and has been organizing in the disability arts community in New York City since 2016. He is currently the artist in resident at the Critical Design Lab at Vanderbilt University and soon to launch a new project called Remote Techniques. We are very excited to have you with us, Kevin. And so, Kevin, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Bhavya. I just posted in the chat a little kind of prompt for an access check-in. So let's take a second to connect with our breath. Maybe notice a mood as you notice any sensations that stand out right now. Think about anything we can do to enhance your engagement right now. Do you need captions? Do you need verbal description of visual material? Please disrespect etiquette in the name of your access needs. So feel free to unmute or enter in the chat anything that we can do to meet your access needs. And we'll just pause for a second to do that. So I'm going to be reading from a Google Doc. So I'm going to post the link in the chat. And then I'm also going to share my screen so that you can follow along there. All right. Let me just get my chat. All right, so 1 second, sorry. So here are two things I'm thinking about this week. One is, what is captioning doing when no one requested it? This is something I've been talking about with my friend and colleague Louise Hickman. We are noticing the way captions are soothing to add to Zoom meetings before we actually understand what forms of access they make possible, which seems to align with a certain checklist-minded notion of access that stabilizes rather than expands how we engage. Louise has taught me to wonder what would happen if, when captions are not requested in a meeting, we were to assign the caption role in Zoom to someone who can experiment with what this text space can do. And the second thing I've been thinking about is something I learned from Amal Dublon recently: how to select text word by word in a screen shared Google Doc at the pace of my speaking in order to create a visual flow of speech. On a Mac, you can do this by pressing Shift, Option, and the right arrow key. On a PC, I believe it would be Shift, Alt, and right arrow key. So this check-in, we've just done models the way I think about access, which is that it's not prefatory, not something we get out of the way before the real program, and not merely theoretical. One of the most powerful things I have learned from disability artistry is that access features are integrated aesthetic materials. So now I'll share a few things I've been doing with my homebody over the last few months. If you're interested in a broad sketch of remote access, I'll point you to a panel I was on with Yo-Yo Lin and Johanna Hedva, organized by Emily Watlington for Art in America in May. Remote Access is also the name of the party series I've been organizing since March, when the idea for a disability-centric Zoom nightlife event emerged in talking with Amy Hamrai, my friend and director of the Critical Design Lab. We wanted to create a place to celebrate crypt knowledge about remote access that had been so submerged by institutional ableism. And we wanted to gather to dance and breathe when we were noticing how disabled people were the first to be affected by COVID-19, but often the last to be consulted in collective responses. So this is the flyer designed by Josh Halstead, oscillating glitch art depicting a femme face. Bold yellow text reads, "Remote Access, a Crypt Nightlife Gathering, Sunday, March 22nd. This queer combination of joy and sorrow motivated two more parties, one during the annual meeting of the Society for Disability Studies, and the most recent one as an event during the Allied Media Conference. So this is the flyer for that party. A center square portal with a purple-pink gradient holds all caps white letters: "Remote Access, Witches and Glitches, Friday, July 24th, 9 to 11 p.m. EDT. 4 other square portals hold info about the party: ASL, captions, audio descriptions, sound description, access doulas, facilitators, spells by Amy Hamrai, Moira Williams, Ezra Bennis, and Perel, vibes by DJ Crypttime, DJ Who Girl, choreo by Octavia Rose, John Herman, shows by Yo-Yo Lin and Kevin Gotkin, and Alopecia. 3 objects have an orange-yellow overlay: a glittering disco ball made with uneven glass shards, a cracked early iPhone with an Arduino board resting on one side, and a lit votive candle. A magic portal does loops in the background, no beginning or end in the frame. The logo of the Allied Media Conference, triangular A, M, and C, is at the bottom of the yellow-pink gradient background. In the top right corner, July 23rd to 26th, 2020, virtual. This flyer was designed by Kevin Gotkin using a kit provided by the Allied Media Conference artist organizers. This party emerged, this last one, witches and glitches, from conversations with Yo-Yo Lin about the generative and artful dimensions of the glitch. In the performance we crafted for the party, part of the text I wrote makes a direct connection between witches and glitches. One origin story for the word glitch is that it's an acronym: Gremlins Lurking in the Computer Hub. Gremlin from the Old English verb gremian, to vex. So they're actually not lurking, they're casting spells. They're beautiful errors concealed. They're dancing in the basement of the machine. And I'll just play a snippet of the recording from that performance.
Back to the overlapping windows, Yo-Yo is casting spells over a disco light. A turtle is swimming in a pond with a tiny turtle on its back, and koi fish swim nearby and follow them. The windows soar around. There's an image of KK's altar at her laptop, orange peels, candles, and her screen mirroring back. KK is dancing with her hands. Yo-Yo is conjuring over the disco light ball and dancing in the colors on her body.
So that was just a sliver of one of the shows at the party, but I want to stress that the artistry at these parties is nested within our orientation to access. This is one way we can glimpse how aesthetics and access are inextricable. So I also then want to spotlight the participation guide we developed for this party. We had several access roles, including ASL and captioning. We also had audio describers using the language interpretation feature in Zoom, which was an experiment that I think worked pretty well. I'll leave it there in the interest of time, but feel free to peruse and cite that guide if it's helpful. And we can also talk about more from that guide. And I'll wrap up here by mentioning the project that is taking up most of my time right now, which is my syllabus for my NYU course that begins next week, called Disability, Technology, and Media. I would love to share that with anyone who's interested, and it's another place where I'll be learning a lot about remote access. So that was just a kind of array of things in the neophysical realm, which is a term that I've been thinking a lot about from this program. So yeah, I guess Bhavya will move to conversation now, huh?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin. That was wonderful and definitely an important conversation on accessibility that we as artists and designers should be constantly having and reflecting on when it comes to our work. So thank you so much for all your great work. And just to start with the discussion, I would like to go ahead and ask my first question to you. So your work centers around forms of endurance and how ableism is ritualized in the world that we live in. According to you, what can technology do for inclusivity, and how do you approach it in your work?
Yeah, so my dissertation research was about the suffix of the marathon, the thon, in latter 20th century American culture. So I was thinking about how the walkathon and the dance-a-thon and now the hackathon have become such powerful forms, often around, if not charity fundraising, then some form of a kind of idea, often in the logic of eliminating disability or curing it. Yeah. So the telethon is like a really good example of a technology or a set of technologies that really began in the 1950s, right when everyone was thinking that television was going to change the world. And what I like to think about is the ritualization more than the kind of technologicalization, technologization. because I think it's the way, it's like the way that ideological forms produce values about the body and about the disabled body that that actually in some ways kind of precede the technological. So, you know, in comparing the telethon and the hackathon, you know, there are some, I think, important similarities between the different technical setups that are kind of more rooted in the way that we ritualize, in this case, you know, kind of the endurance and the performance of kind of being out of breath in the name of curing disability. So yeah, I often think of technology as kind of secondary to ritual and ideological forms before that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin. And I think my next question would be, could you talk about ways that we as artists can be more inclusive to share, collaborate, experience, and in the end, exist together in ways that are supported by the digital?
Yeah, I feel like that's like the key question, right? Like what can we do? I think what I kind of started in my remarks thinking about access as material, because often we think of it as kind of secondary, you know, or there are certain kind of movements, right? Like relational aesthetics that will think of only some forms of actual dynamic relationships as the materials. But if we think of the entire kind of circuit or surround of access as artistic materials, we get to, I think, normalizing access needs and trying to produce work that actually meets people's access needs, which is, you know, I think a radical
Definitely.
idea. You know, we'll get to things like when artists submit their visual works for exhibition, that they include description of those visual works, and that it's not just some kind of one-to-one indexical description, but that it's deeply poetic, maybe, or artful in the way and in a different modality than the visual work. So I think, yeah, if we conceptualize access as material in everything we do, even when we think we're not kind of centering disability or access, it's kind of always there, then I think from that we get to some really, really profound changes.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Kevin. And now we will open the floor to everyone for questions. So please share your question in the chat, or you can ask in the chat by typing, "I have a question," and I will call on you and you can turn on your camera and ask the question on video if you're comfortable. And I see we have one question already in the chat from Sohi, and she's asking, she says, "Thank you for sharing your work with us. And the question is, your artistic practice involves accessible media and equity. How has the drastic shift to the digital world, especially in the past few months, impacted accessibility in terms of space?"
Yeah, thank you, Sohi, for that question. It's a really great question. And actually, I kind of scripted this maybe a response here, because I think one of the dangers of thinking too much in the kind of possibility of remote access is that we ignore more fundamental relationships to space and to land. And so I kind of want to like tack between showing and working with the possibility and the history of disability knowledge about remote access, without also kind of despatializing our relationship. So this is also a kind of land acknowledgement, which I think sometimes when we just do it at the beginning and then move on doesn't actually, you know, kind of plug into the political forms of our work. So this is how I think this answers your question a little bit, Sohi. So there's a limit to thinking about remote access as benevolently distributed or despatialized. So my home body is right now in Lenape-Hoking, the homeland of the Lenape and the site of multiple indigenous movements. My access to water, to air, to electricity has been created through violations of land and body sovereignty made by people whose ancestors were not stewards of this land. So my home body is directly connected to a socio-technical system that operates through ongoing colonization. The land does not matter less because we can celebrate crypt culture on Zoom, and anyone living in Northern California, where energy is being rationed because forests turned to fuel during gentrification that failed to honor centuries of land stewardship principles, will know this. So I think there's ways in which, you know, the last few months could actually kind of bring us into even greater awareness about the kind of expanded body, right? Our body connected to like this AC here, right? That connected to the electrical network that powers our homes. And so yeah, I think one of the things that we're tempted to think about is that like space has become less important. Like, look what we can do on Zoom. And I think it's that, and often can be that, and especially when we're recognizing disability knowledge in leading the ways that we connect remotely. But also there's this invitation that, you know, to really think more actually about space and about land and about physical connection, right? Like, you know, what we're not touching each other. I'm just like touching this chair and it's not physically co-located, you know. So I think, yeah, I hope that starts to answer that question. So
yeah, thank you, Kevin. And I think we have another question from Pavitra. And the question is, how has the current situation shaped discussions around accessibility in remote connection?
Yeah, I think for a lot of us at the beginning of lockdowns, we were kind of like bewildered and bemused at how quickly everyone suddenly adopted all of these ideas about remote connection. You know, it was like disabled students have for years been asking, you know, chronically ill students have been asking for years for access to class content, you know, or to be able to kind of respond to the needs of a body in ways that not can't always be predicted, right? Like even hours in advance of class, and then suddenly it was like, here we go, we can actually do it. Actually, all of us can orient to that when we need to. But I'm also noticing that like when folks are designing more complex remote access protocols for work or for school or for worship, they're also making those rapidly inaccessible through the idea of kind of making it like sexier and somehow sleeker and like better. And so I wouldn't say it's that like suddenly there's this distributed form of disability knowledge and remote connection. It's also that those remote connections are building new forms of accessibility and leaving disability knowledge in the wake, right? So replicating again this problem of lack of consultation with disability communities and people who are most affected by the systems that are changing right now.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Kevin. So we have Sarah. Sarah, you can go ahead and ask your question. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Hi, thank you so much. Yeah, so my name is Sarah, and I'm currently located on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, which in English we call Vancouver in Canada. So Kevin, I met you at the Art in America talk in May, which seems so long ago. And then I reached out and then we talked, and it's interesting because I met you remotely. So it's good to see you again. And thank you for advertising this conference on your Instagram, which I follow because I didn't know about what was going on at the new school, but I'll follow you guys down too. I just wanted to ask this question verbally because it's really convoluted. So I think it might be faster if I just say it. So from a kind of organizational perspective, I currently work for the Vancouver Art Gallery, and you know, this is just my opinion, it's not theirs, but so before the pandemic, what I've seen is that lots of organizations, especially here in Canada, and I want to kind of preface this by saying I know probably everyone here is American. In Canada, we do not have the ADA, so we don't have anything like a federal disability act. We did have one pass a couple of years ago, but it's it's basically just for like provincial and federal government built buildings, and it's just a matter of physical access. So it's at the beginning stage. But so right before the pandemic, arts and culture organizations were making actually some really good progress on the accessibility commitments that they had. And then obviously the pandemic hit and everyone felt that it was a lot of work just to adapt like everything that we did already, like non-accessible wise, online. So from what I've seen at that initial stage, kind of in March and April here, there was a lot of discarding of accessibility progress. It was kind of like a token gesture anyway. And then now, which I feel like it's kind of the maturity of this pandemic, it seems like finally we've returned a bit to adding like the digital accessibility features online. So my question is, what do you feel are some of our biggest challenges if we have another wave of shutdown, or if we all recover and then return to physical operations again? How will this, like another round of chaos, impact accessibility? Will the now like the progress that we've made on Zoom, on digital platforms, will that again now be the one that is interrupted? And then, sorry, can I also get your syllabus? And will you allow people to audit your course, or kind of, yeah, okay, thank you.
Yes, well, first of all, we need to totally boost Sarah's work. Sarah is a fierce disability arts organizer in Vancouver, where there is so much disability artistry happening. I mean, there's a lot of incredible change happening in Vancouver, and Sarah is a huge part of that. So thank you for your work, Sarah. And I love that we're talking about remote access, and like here, our connection started entirely in forums like this. Yeah, okay, so really good question, right? Like if we have made progress, if there's something to work with, if there's new kind of energy in the kind of pedagogy of disability centered accessibility, what happens, what happens next, right? Like if we have a major second wave, or we keep rates low. Yeah, I mean, I think I am really trying to focus on the kind of possibility of consciousness raising at this moment, right? Like, so I'm teaching this course on disability starting next week, and I often get a lot of students who don't think that they have any meaningful relationship to disability. And in fact, it's this well-intentioned distance making, right? Like, kind of, I'm just here to learn about this community, right? And like this semester, all we're going to start with for the first few weeks is grounding in our access needs, because we are all, implicated in these new forms. And I often think the kind of politics of language around disability, especially now, is just less helpful. Like, kind of, what do I call myself, or how do I identify? We could reorient the conversation to how do we get care and access to fundamental resources to people, right? Like, a lot of people joined their neighborhood's mutual aid groups, right? And these are things that are, disability justice is happening in places where it's not always named. So, my sense is that we continue with that amazing, those resources, right? People knowing that they are living in the kind of historical time of a pandemic, which gives them maybe more intimate knowledge about what disability and illness means in their lives than they've ever really allowed themselves to kind of think about. And I think I was, just reading about folks who have had COVID-19 for months, like since the pandemic started. This is tens of thousands of people who have had COVID-19 for like 4, 5, 6 months. And it's kind of it's just an astonishing entry into chronic illness for a huge amount of people who, I think this is the kind of personal pedagogy of disability and chronic illness that we, now we can do some of the more maybe classic consciousness raising, like framing this and reading the kind of history of disability culture, and then modeling, like I was trying to do in my access check, like, here's a tip that I learned this week, So I think that's where I'm putting a lot of hope, and is trying to, ferret out the disability knowledge that we hold in our bodies, even when we haven't named it as that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share my syllabus. Oh yeah, the answer to, I'm calling this my Netflix semester, because I'm gonna do like an hour of content. I'm gonna like produce, I call them weekly episodes. So I'm making those, they're gonna be 15, like kind of like a Netflix season each week. And I would love to release those broadly. So So I will find a way to kind of publicize that as we go along. I'm gonna have to be imagining so many audiences getting to know my students, but also wanting, especially now that I'm producing content like this, wanting there to be a kind of course that folks could take. This is one of the things that I've thought about for a while as a professor, like, why don't I turn all of my teaching materials into something more public facing? And like here again, right, we have the pandemic is urging us to do these forms of teaching and care that we had, that maybe we wanted to, but now we really can do. So more to come on that.
I'm so excited. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Kevin. So we have one, I think, last question from Jason. And the question is, where are the pitfalls of accessible creations? For example, audio descriptions might be of a specific language, but not another. Those who aren't necessarily bad decisions to make, but how do you approach that challenge? And how do we avoid unintentional exclusion?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. That's a really key question. And I think one that a lot of folks organizing and writing in disability communities, work with a lot, right? Because sometimes we imagine that access is this thing that we can provide for everyone. You'll see it kind of institutionalized, right? Universal design for learning. When really access is very difficult to cultivate and isn't maybe even something that we achieve fully, because we do have these kinds of fundamental kind of incompatibilities between some access forms, like audio description being provided, but maybe not live language translation being provided. I think I like to start there, right? Like by thinking of access as a way to move and as it gets us out of the kind of legality and compliance-minded thinking about disability, where everyone feels worried that they're, maybe going to be sued, right? And that's actually one of the downsides of the ADA. Although it is a major, important piece of legislation, people have now understood disability around them in terms of like, oh my gosh, am I doing something wrong? And instead, I like to think of access as this much more expansive, creative, set of materials. I think also designing for, there's this great quote by an author I've been reading a lot this summer, Adrienne Marie Brown, about finding the conversation that can only be had among the group of people that you're with. There's only one conversation that can really happen with exactly these people. And I think when we stop thinking of spaces in hypothetical terms and we actually attune to our own and everyone else's access needs, we get to this like really adapted and incredibly tailored form of engagement. And that requires, like I said earlier, that we don't kind of think of access as what we do in the beginning, like, okay, now we did the access check-in, let's move to the real stuff. That actually, the real stuff is constantly negotiating how we are enhancing our own engagement.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you once again. It was wonderful and definitely very inspiring for all of us. And we look forward to all your work in the future. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank everyone for being here today. We will be uploading the talk on the website in the next few days. In the meantime, we hope you'll join us for our other artist talks, workshop, and showcase online for amazing projects from my peers that you can view on mfadt.space. And it has a list of all the full exhibitions of our project. So thank you so much. And I hope to see you all again tomorrow and day after. Take care.
Thank you, Bhavya, and thank you, Rosa, and everyone involved in this amazing expo. Congrats. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Okay. Bye, everyone.